Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to episode 53 of the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and today we have something a little bit different from the usual musical theatre fare. My guest today is Nick Corston, founder of STEAMco, a British nonprofit that aims to connect kids with their art and communities with their schools. STEAMco travels around the UK with a kitted-out trailer to provide schools with creativity days that include workshops, coding, and rocket building. In the past few weeks, STEAMco have run workshops across the UK where kids put together shows, perform for their schools, and live stream to the wider community. Welcome, Nick.
Hello, Louisa. Gosh, this is lovely to be here. And what a lovely intro. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
It's always lovely to hear people talk about you. You think, oh, that's nice.
Oh, I've done those things. So in your work, you've talked a lot about being a dad and wanting to inspire your own kids and how it was your own dad who inspired you with a train set. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh my goodness, that's a long time ago now, although it does pop up in my films, I must admit. I've got a little film my dad made when I was 1, which is more than 20 years ago, because I'm a little bit over 21, as I'm sure you can imagine. And my dad spent 2 or 3 months' wages on an old cine film and a camera and projector. It's not Super 8, Standard 8, actually. Actually, your audience are probably interested in these technical details, but most film was 16 millimeter. So literally, in the early days of home movie, they literally cut 16 millimeter film in half to make 8 millimeter. But if you think about it, it only had the little sprocket holes on the one side. And that was Standard 8. And then they thought, hang on, this is taken off. We'll go properly with this. And they put the sprocket holes on both sides to give greater control. So the real purists have Standard 8, and as we did, and everybody else got Super 8. Anyway, I digress. Are you still awake? I've got this lovely little film my dad made of me when I was 1 with my first ever train set. And it's nothing more than a loop of track and a little clockwork train buzzing around and me marvelling at this with my father. And then a magical moment. My dad shows me how to make a bridge. And I love going into schools showing this to the kids because I say, what did my dad use to make a bridge? And all the smart Alex get their hands up and say, you used your arm. And then somebody, I say, well, that's great. Yeah, they're all right answers. Somebody else will say, well, you used your hand. And I say, yeah, that's great. And I say, well, what else? Oh, you used metal, you used Lego, you used wood, you used bricks. I said, whatever, your imagination's on fire. My dad showed me how to make a bridge with my arm. But really, he was showing me how to use my imagination. And in my head, that bridge wasn't made with my arm. It was made of bricks. And there were boys and girls and people waving at the train. And there was smoke coming through our faces as the train went past. And really that reinforces to me what I call the 3 greatest gifts that anybody can give a child, their own child or anybody else's child, or even themselves. And the 3 greatest gifts are some time, stories, and art. Time to play with your children, to read with them, to make with them, or just to be with them. In this busy day and age, sometimes just being there with your kids is priceless. To give them stories that they can tell, to give them some cultural capital, to go to cool places with them and do cool things with. It doesn't have to cost the earth, but things that they can create stories in later life with, and also to give them their art. And we can talk about art later on. My art, as a result of that, was engineering. I went on to be an engineer at university, and here I am now with lots of gadgets and gizmo, which I think is probably what's brought me to you today. So that was a long answer, but I hope that was okay. I hope you got enough tape for this recording, Louisa.
No, that was beautiful. And thankfully now we are in the digital age and don't have to worry about length of tape, just enough data, enough storage space for all the video.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that you became an engineer. Can you tell us a bit about that past life before what you're currently doing?
Well, funny enough, actually, somebody asked me the other day where a lot of my inspiration came from, and funny enough, it came from not having a television. I was actually 60 the other week. I don't tell many people that, so don't tell your 100,000 billion audience, will you, for goodness sake. But
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to celebrate it for the rest of my life, I think, lasting that long. But no, I mean, my mother always used to say that I was very creative and very busy and very active, not just because they hadn't invented ADHD in those days, but she actually felt it was because we didn't have a TV. So I'd occupy myself. I'd make things. I'd do things. I'd play. I'd create. I'd be imaginative. I'd be curious. And my brother's 2 years younger than me, and then we did get a little black wooden box with a black and white screen, and we did watch a lot of TV, and he watched more TV than me. I don't judge him. He's had a very successful life, but very different. But I credit a lot of my creativity with some of the programs the BBC produced, funny enough. We have this fantastic kids program called Blue Peter, which was a bi-weekly, as in twice a week, magazine program lasting about 20, 30 minutes. But it was about interesting things. They did make things every week. They made things from sticky back plastic and cardboard inners from toilet roll tubes, which, funny enough, they stopped making now. And another program was called Vision On. Have you heard of Morph, the animated cartoon character Morph, little plasticine?
No.
You've heard of Wallace and Gromit?
Yep.
Do you know? Yeah. So Wallace and Gromit is from the same Aardman animation studio as Morph, and Morph was a small plasticine animated character that used to star on the Vision On arts and crafts program, and it was I think it was actually possibly even for deaf and, well, not blind people, for deaf people, because there's no narrative. It was all visual, and they do sculpting, they do painting, they do drawing, they do illustrations with thumbprints and do little insect lines off them. And they had an art gallery at the end, and we used to dream of seeing our art in that art gallery at the end, just a camera panning through lots and lots of kids' art. But for me, so ironically, I got a great start in life by not having a TV, but it was then supercharged by some brilliant creative content that the beautiful, wonderful BBC created for kids. So yeah, so from there I went. I was always very hands-on, very practical. I was very much into my model railways, making things. This is my grind. This is what really kicked me off in life: to be creative, to be a maker, to be a doer, to be curious. I went to university, did engineering, but when I was at university, I was building sound systems. I built myself a disco mixer, and I ran a sound system and was DJing. So I've DJed for 40 years ever since I went to university. So yeah, a bit of we have a phrase, a jack of all trades, master of none. Does that sort of resonate with you?
Oh my goodness, this is so great. As you were talking about the BBC, you reminded me of a program that I watched growing up called Art Attack, the British show with Neil, I forget his name now, but it was this great show that inspired creativity, and at the end of each episode, he'd do like a work that you could see. They would have like a drone or something, like a crane camera that you could see from the air. This piece that was like lots of little bits and pieces that when the camera panned up, it created this massive picture. It was such a great show. BBC have such amazing content.
Well, there've been all these different genres of TV program. Obviously, I missed it. I went to university. I didn't sit around watching kids' TV when I was at university. I was too busy DJing and clubbing, you see. So I would imagine you're a little bit younger than me.
And so you've talked also in your work about being inspired after your work in engineering, that you're inspired by the House of Fairy Tales at Camp Festival in Dorset, a kind of Glastonbury for kids. So can you tell us more about what that event was and how it inspired you to create Steamco?
That's interesting. Yeah, gosh, you've rightly so jumped about 20 or 30 years in my life. I had a career in digital media and marketing. I did some of the first ever websites. So I did actually the first ever website for Microsoft from a live stream for the Edinburgh Festival. I did CD-ROM giveaways for exhibitions. I actually went to a conference in San Francisco called, you probably struggle to believe there was ever such a thing, the Microsoft CD-ROM conference. Can you imagine there was ever such a thing? It's a bit like going to a paper event, isn't it? You know. And I saw Bill Gates at that event show video on a computer for the very first time, even before Apple's QuickTime, and gave a business card to one of his colleagues, and they sent me a development kit, and I did the first ever video on a PC for Microsoft here in the UK, and we had to fly to Sweden to make a VHS videotape, you probably don't remember those, about what video on a computer looked like, because nobody had the ability to play video on their computers. Hilarious. Anyway, but that's where were we? So we were talking about going to that festival. Yeah, so my life changed with children, and I do have a theory, and I don't mean this to sound harsh to people who haven't got kids, never had kids, not going to have kids, whatever, but nobody really, really, really cares totally about kids and creativity in the context of children until they have them, or are very close to somebody who does. And I don't say that to be nasty. I just believe that you care in a different way. And same with me. I mean, do you know Seth Godin? You've come across him? So
Mm-hmm.
Seth Godin, classic, fantastic in marketing, advertising, strategy, behavior, blah, blah, blah. As far as I'm concerned, another person didn't give a damn about kids and creativity in that context until he had kids. And so he thought, they're not going to teach creativity out of my children. So he wrote a paper. Now, if you think of an academic, Ken Robinson, for example, so Ken Robinson wrote a book about creative schools. He called it Creative Schools because he's an academic. He's not the most creative person in the world, bless him, with respect. But he called a book about creative schools, Creative Schools. Seth Godin writes a book about creativity in schools called Stop Stealing Dreams, which, if you're a parent, gets you right there. If you're a creative, gets you right there. If you care about kids, creativity, and all our futures, if you're what I call a creative carer, it gets you right there. Now, that's the difference. And so basically, I didn't care about kids or creativity, even though I was in the creative industries and had a creative background and was a child once, believe it or not. Well, actually, I still am. Probably haven't. One day, maybe I'll grow up. But there were three things that really were a massive milestone moment for me. The first was seeing Sir Ken's TED Talk on how schools can kill creativity, which I'm sure anybody watching this has seen. And if not, why not? And if not, press pause and go and watch it. No.1 TED Talk. The second thing was reading half a book, and that book was by a colleague of Ken's, actually, and flatmate when they were students, Professor Guy Claxton, a book called What's the Point of School? Because if you've got kids and you're sending them to school, you want to know what the flipping point of school is. And when you read a book like that, it asks some very interesting questions, because it's clear that we have a system that is doing exactly what it was designed to do, and that was to teach people to sit still in factories and offices. It's just we don't need people to do that anymore. We need them to live creative lives and full lives and think and be critical and curious. And, well, some people might not agree with that. So that was an interesting book. I only read half of it, so I thought, wow, I'm sold. Put the book down, cracked on. The third thing, as you said, was going to a festival called Camp Festival. Now, it's a little bit like kind of Glastonbury or a Burning Man or a Coachella for families, basically. So incredibly cool, very high production values, run by a chap called Rob DeBank, a very famous, UK famous DJ and creative, and his wife, Josie. They used to run a real ravey kind of festival called Festival. Like everybody, had kids, thought, well, let's run a festival for us and kids. And so moved into that space. And I thought, I want this in my kids' school. I want creativity festivals in my kids' school. So I went back to the school, had a chat with the head teacher, who made the classic mistake of saying yes to me. And in fact, as a Guardian, there's a headline in the Guardian newspaper that says, I just talk quickly till people say yes. Now, that was the headline of this article when I launched this project. And basically, 2 months later, I went back to her and said, right, Miss Woodford, this next week. She said, what is? I said, well, we're running this big creativity festival. I've got 70 parents coming in, and you said yes, don't you remember? Oh, blimey, did I? Okay. And we made it happen. And what was wonderful about this day, we call it, we call them Steamco days, but what was really special about this was bringing the community into the school and collaborating across the school with that community. So we have teachers working with parents, business people from the community, other people that we'd identified who had something to add. And I passionately believe just about everybody in a school community and in a community has talent latent within them that can inspire children. Even if it's just patience, even if it's just listening, even if it's just tapping somebody on the back and say, well done, keep trying, not having a clue what the hell they're doing, but knowing that support and encouragement is of value. And we did that for 5 or 6 years. So there was an event at Camp Festival called the House of Fairy Tales, and they let us call our event the Little House of Fairy Tales for a couple of years because we couldn't think of a name and thought what they were doing was lovely. And we thought, well, maybe we could help them scale what they did. And we rebranded it to Steamco a few years later with a big event. So yeah, that's the rest is history, really. So on those days, the kids could literally wander around the school off timetable and engage in any of the 20 creative thinking and doing activities that took their fancy. And we had a little passport that they could get a stamp for every activity they created. Replicating that has been the challenge since. Some schools can't allow or don't allow their kids to free roam like that, so we have a more structured carousel approach, which is fine. Some schools have, one head teacher said to me, I couldn't even get 6 parents cleared with the Child Protection Agency, DBS cleared, to come and work in my school. So my setting is very different. And we have to understand all these differences and make it work, because the most important thing is the child. And the most important thing is that the kids have access to these experiences and that we make them safe and structured. So that's been the challenge, really. But hey, nothing's stopping us now, that's for sure.
What were the kinds of, you said there were 20 activities. What were the activities like?
We kind of loosely structured them under the STEAM skills. The organisation I started was STEAMco, which, stands for science, technology, engineering and maths, the STEM with an A for art. But for me, I don't know if you've noticed, a bit of a steam train fan. I also loved that play on steam power, on the Industrial Revolution, moving aside for the Creativity Revolution. I don't know if you've heard of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the big British engineer who built railways and bridges and was one of the founding fathers of the railways of the world. So Steam Co. to me sounds quite steam company kind of thing. But anybody who says steam company in an interview like this, so this is your first warning, Louisa, anybody who says steam company to me gets a slap on the leg, because we are actually... We're not a company, because it sounds very formal and commercial, and just because I talk quickly doesn't mean I'm trying to make lots of money here. What the Co stands for is collaboration. We are structured legally as STEAM Collaboration CIC, Community Interest Company. So it's all about collaboration. It's all about creativity, which is what the STEAM represents, and collaboration. So back to your point, we would give the children the opportunity to engage in 20 creative thinking and doing activities that loosely were related around the STEAM skills, making paper rockets, doing some coding, spin painting, rolling up newspapers with a machine we've got to make titanium strong sticks that we could build chairs and bridges out of, making massive bubbles and asking what it is that makes them stay together and why they don't fall apart. I mean, one activity, we got the Raspberry Pi, little sort of tiny little computer thing. We got 20 of those, the first 20 just or so on the market. And we actually taught 200 kids aged between 5 and 11 to code a Raspberry Pi computer to make a Lego robot crocodile bite their finger when they put their hand in its mouth. I ended up on Al Jazeera, ended up in Brazilian newspapers. BBC came and recorded a series on the back of that, because this was like 10 years ago. We even built an electric car from a car kit and raced it on the world famous Goodwood racetrack. So and that was just one of 20 activities on the day. We had a ton of clay delivered, and the kids made an Anthony Gormley style sculpture of little faces and little heads. We've had Tom Moore, a fantastic drummer of a band called Scritti Politti back in the 80s and 90s, and he came in with 100 bongos, mateme drums, and got the whole school drumming at the start and end of the day, and gave drumming lessons during the day. We did breakbeat dancing. We've done it's just fantastic. And the challenge really has been, how do you package it up? How do you scale it? And how do you take this to every school in the UK, if not the world? And that's the challenge, and that's where we're going next, really.
And so I want to fast forward to 2020, when everything was shut down and everything had to go online. And was that the year of your 3-day Glastonbury Festival?
That's right. Goodness me. I just built it up. I'd given up my career. I had an advertising and marketing background, digital media, and I gave it all up to try and focus on rolling STEAMco out. And I was starting to get a few bookings. I'd started to get a few keynote speaker gigs as well, which is great. Great way of spreading the word and getting some money, because I was desperate for some income. And obviously lockdown hit, and I lost absolutely every booking. Obviously, all the schools had to cancel. The other tiny little bit of income I had dried up. And I was really grateful to an organisation called LGFL, who are a creative technology charity in London, who provide internet connectivity for London schools and a number of across the UK, because they'd asked me to keynote their conference. And they said, we're going to have to cancel that. I said, don't, because they were the only people that had some money that hadn't been cancelled completely. I said, whatever you do, don't cancel it. I jumped on my bike, and this is the day before lockdown. I cycled across London feverishly and had a chat with their CEO, John Jackson, and convinced him to consider doing a live event, an online event, so not live, an online event. And how I was going to get this amazing technology. So we'd use green screens and make it look like everybody's in the same room and blah, blah, blah. And the technology I was going to use, it turned out was like $50,000, and it's like really high-end stuff. And in the end, he gave me some money and said, look, go away and do what you can. So I bought a system. And part of that was this green screen studio you see over in the back here. And I had about 4 or 5 cameras. And the first session I did was like all feedback. So I didn't realize that how much Zoom and certain systems take the audio cancel reverse audio and stop the echo and stop the feedback. And I taught myself green screening. And then the government, the Arts Council of England, announced emergency COVID funding to keep arts organisations and people like us going. And I applied for a grant from them, and they gave us some money. So basically what I did, I actually ran 5 community art events. So the first one, we pretended we were at the Eden Project in Cornwall, which is a big ecology project with a big sort of space-type domes. And they gave us permission to say we were there, which we weren't, but I just to use some JPEGs. And I did a 3-day festival. We had Basil Brush, who's like an amazing children's entertainer. He did a video. We had kids performing. So we did 3 days. I had a DJ set on the Saturday night. I don't know if there's still a disco mirror ball up there from the heyday of that. So I had DJs, and people could dance on a green screen at home on Zoom, and then we'd vision mix them in as if they were at the venue. And then Glastonbury was coming up, and that had been cancelled, obviously. So we actually... It turned out a dad in my son's school, it was a world-class computer graphics 3D modeler, animator, CGI guy. And he built a model of the Glastonbury Pyramid stage. So the Glastonbury Festival in the UK is symbolic because it has this beautiful pyramid stage, which is the main stage where the biggest bands play. Elton John's playing there this year. Coldplay, all those people have done it. And he made a 3D model of this stage. As it happened, a year prior to this, I'd been working in a school just down the road from Glastonbury and launched a dynamite rocket and did my activities and workshops with the kids. And I'd actually got drone footage of me in the school. And we managed to superimpose the CGI model of the cardboard pyramid stage on the playground. So it looked as if we were actually there and the kids were in the playground, but obviously they were all locked up at home. And we did a 3-day festival. So literally, from starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'd be live on the BBC local radio, sort of 8 till 9, telling everybody to log in. And I tell you what, when you're working on your own, boom, that time comes at you like a steam train, go live time, nothing like a podcast when you can sort of wait for me to get my act together before we start. And so I was live between 10 o'clock in the morning and midnight, non-stop. So 12, 14-hour live streams. I actually did stop for an hour for lunch. I had a friend, Malumba, who's my artist in residence production assistant. He was at home, so he was on WhatsApp sending me messages and telling me that the speakers, and I had people coming in on Skype and Zoom. Oh my goodness. We had Martin and Gary Kemp, who are like very famous singers in the Spandau Ballet, the big pop band. We had Glenn Matlock, who was the guitarist from the Sex Pistols, did a set. And he did that with Earl Slick, who's David Bowie's guitarist. But we had kids. We had a young chap a young lad from Leeds with cerebral palsy playing the piano, and he sent a video of him, and it was just brilliant. And then we did another one where we actually did a real event as lockdown lifted, where we did an event in a field in Devon, where people could come and walk through a maze of artworks, which we'd cut into the long grass. And then we had a small area where about 40, 50 people camped. So, yeah, I mean, it was just incredible. I learned all that from there. So I think that was my Blue Peter days coming back to me, really. Never giving up, being curious, working out how it works and making it happen. So here I am with green screens and all sorts of tech.
Your passion for this and your creativity is so inspiring. And I'm curious how your marketing and digital background have played into teaching yourself how to use green screen and filmmaking.
Well, it's funny actually, because as you said that, it made me realise what an utter failure I am, because I'm sure a lot of people would actually wonder if I really have got a background in advertising and marketing, because I'm absolutely rubbish at marketing. I'm fairly good at making little videos that nobody seems to watch unless a really big retweeter shares them. It's an interesting one. I think I took technology to the advertising world and the marketing world. I was very much a pioneer. I started my own digital agency working from home. I sold the idea to an exhibition company of giving CD-ROMs away at exhibitions. That got me going for 3 or 4 years, and that got me Microsoft and Apple and Adobe as clients in those days. So, yeah, I mean, really in the advertising and marketing world, all I was doing was delivering that technology. I had a web agency of my own, one of the early ones called Arawak, which is to capture the kind of pioneering nature of people getting there first. really, I'll be honest with you, I've always been quite bored by the advertising and marketing world when it does get down to the analytics and the numbers and the targeting and the segmentation. Yeah, that's for planners to do. I'm kind of like a crazy sort of, well, I shouldn't even call myself a creative in that context, because those people reserve the label creative for genuinely creative people. I'm just a bit, as I said, jack of all trades. So I suppose my skill, really, my secret, was in a way inspiring people, leading from the front, being up all night with people, writing pitches, delivering pitches. And I'll never forget pitching to the Mayor of London, actually, for a website for 2012, actually. They had a summer like no other, hundreds of events across London. And we won that pitch. And afterwards we said, why did you win it? They said, because we wanted to work with you. We just loved the energy in your team. And I'm going to blow my own trumpet now, because that's the energy I take to a team, I guess. And I had a great team, so we vibed off each other. And they thought, we want to work with them. We want to have as much fun between 9 and 5 as they are, you know. And so, yeah, that was... Yeah, I've forgotten all about that. Yeah, there you go. You really are digging it out now, Louisa, aren't you? Well done. There's some exclusive content in here.
And I think that your energy, you so rightfully should be blow your own trumpet about it, because that's what drew me to you when I saw a video on Twitter about the work that you were doing for Let's Create Christmas with Parklands Primary School in Leeds, and your energy and enthusiasm for helping the kids to create and be creative and put their work out there and live stream it was so exciting to me, and that's why I reached out to you. So let's fast forward to that. The Let's Create Christmas project. Can you tell how it started and where it is now?
This is a 4-hour podcast, isn't it? No, I'm joking. Yeah. A word sprung to mind there, synergy, because having just blown my own trumpet about this super creative, high energy, inspiring bloke, whatever, people keep saying it, so I'm going to start believing it. But there's a word synergy, which for me, I always define as 1 + 1 = 3. So when somebody like me meets somebody like me, it's either a clash of horns and we just kill each other and limp out of the room, or if there's a good Venn diagram of crossover, there's common ground of passion and creativity. There's a bit over here of me getting green screens and tech like that working. But when that bit over there is working with young people and changing lives, as in what that person does, but the crossover is passion and vision and energy and trust and collaboration, wow, there's a lot that can happen. And 4 years ago, I went to Leeds, and a friend of mine, Bryn, actually, I emailed him and said, you're from Leeds, you know anybody who'd let me come up? There's a conference I'm going to on the Saturday. And he gave me 4 schools. Now, a lot of people don't give you their contacts like that. You know, that for me is true collaboration. Yeah, here's some people, go and see them, they'll love you. And what goes around comes around. And on the last morning, I went into Parklands Primary, and the chap came up, so I'm the head teacher, 3-piece suit, Chris. I went to shake his hand. He said, we don't do handshakes here. He just gave me a big hug and turned the sound system on. Goodness me. I think he dropped a Gorillaz track, actually. Just fantastic. And he told me how when he took that school over 4 or 5 years prior, it's on the most socially deprived community estate, the Seacroft estate in Leeds in Yorkshire, which is one of the most socially deprived parts of the country, if not the Europe. Social housing projects, whatever you guys say over there. And he went in there, and 170 of the 300 children were being excluded for bad behaviour and problems. And if you know anything about behaviour in school, it can be caused by a number of factors: home life, learning difficulties, hunger, whatever. And they even had a padded room in that school for children. This is a primary school. So children that couldn't behave were placed in a padded room till they calmed down or learnt to behave. And this is enough to make a lot of people cry, because it is heartbreaking. Chris shut the padded room down, he turned it around, and he's just written a book, and he bought a sound system. First thing he did was buy a sound system and filled that school with music. And he's just written a book about his times at turning that school around, where no children are excluded now, where it's now outstanding. The UK government judged schools on 4 grades: failing, requires improvement, good, and outstanding. He took it from failing to outstanding in 4 years, and has just written a book called A School Built on Love. because that school is now grounded in love and empathy and understanding and respect. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. So I worked with him on that Friday morning. That night I had dinner with him and his family. And you know, it's just such a fantastic person, and he's become a real rock, a real ally, a real collaborator. Because as I say, he's an incredible educator. That's what he knows and what he does. He's got that flamboyant bit in the middle, which is where we found common ground, and I can kind of get the green screens working. So what a team! And we've done some great stuff together, coding sessions and all sorts of things. And he's very popular on Twitter, so he's great at amplifying stuff. And so just before lockdown, I should probably take it back actually. I was at a black tie dinner from my former life. I was invited to a marketing society awards dinner, and everybody's wearing black tie. I got sent. I'd been at the conference. They said, "Do you want to come? Just go home and get your black tie on." I had to get the cobwebs off that. I hadn't had that out for a while. And I ended up sitting next to the marketing director of John Lewis, which is a big department store in the UK. And I'd heard that every year their Christmas TV ad features a song by a musician, and it's the biggest Christmas ad of the year. And I'd heard it was going to be Elton John. So I said, "Do you fancy an early Christmas present, Craig?" And he said, "Why, what have you got?" And I'd never met the bloke before. In fact, he was sitting behind me. I had to tap him on the shoulders on one of those big round tables behind me. And I said, "Do you want an early Christmas present?" He said, "Well, what have you got?" I said, I gave him a rocket I'd rolled in the sort of bath I nipped out and rolled this paper rocket about this big like I do in schools. As I got one to hand, there's a rocket up there, actually. That's a slightly different one, about that sort of size. And I gave him a book. And again, I've got the book to hand, actually. I did have one somewhere, but a book called Rocket Boys. And I'll come back to Rocket Boys. Don't let me forget to tell you about Rocket Boys. And he said, "Well, that's lovely. What's that all about?" I said, "Well, you've got Elton John for your Christmas ad, haven't you? Come on, you can tell me. It's coming out tomorrow, isn't it?" He said, "Well, we have, but we haven't done Rocket Man." I thought, "Oh my goodness, you've missed a trick, because you could have merchandised the heck out of some rockets you could have bought in from China, and you'd have paid for your ads, because that's obviously the whole point of these ads, to flog stuff." Yeah. So the next day, the ad came out, and it was your song. His gift was his song, and this one's for you. So I ripped it off YouTube very quickly, put some subtitles on it about how lucky Elton John was to be given a piano as a child, how hard he worked, how much money he's made, how many friends he's made, how he's made the world a better place, and how we need to fight for creativity in our schools, and stuck it back on YouTube and Twitter. Elton John saw it, retweeted it, had 50,000 views in an hour. Now, the following day, I was due to be doing a keynote speech at the Grand Hall in Cardiff in South Wales. So I phoned up a school in Cardiff and said, "Hey, do you fancy a free rocket session in the morning?" And they said, "Yeah, because schools have anything for free." So I went in there in the morning and had the most fantastic time. Again, a very socially deprived community in Tiger Bay in Cardiff, which is one of the most racially diverse parts of the world because of all the slave ships that used to come in, all the coal, all the industry, and it's an incredible melting pot. And then in the afternoon, I did my keynote speech and then snuck into a back room. If you imagine a place like the Congress with all the round seats and a big throne where the MC sits, I saw that was empty. So I snuck in there and got 3 or 4 phones set up, and I filmed myself doing a talk and announced a UK tour for the 12 days of Creative Christmas. And I actually blagged the car off Peugeot Citroën and drove from Cornwall all the way to Scotland over 2 weeks, every day stopping in 2 days to do an assembly all about Elton John and his life and rockets, making paper rockets with the kids, and then launching a dynamite rocket, and then jumped in the car and went to the next place. I actually slept in the car one night because it was so hand to mouth of finding these schools and ringing up schools off Google. And I got to Sheffield in Yorkshire, and I drove into the John Lewis branch there, and I walked in there, and because I had to get a new charger for my iPhones, I'd left it in one of the schools in my hurry, and I walked into the Lego department. There's a Lego train set there. But because when I do my talks, I show my little train set film. And I went into the toy department and I picked up a Lego train set. Is there any chance I could have this? They said, "Well, who the hell are you?" I said, "I've just made a video that's promoted you to the world." "Oh, great. Okay, you can have it." And I went to Parklands Primary, did my day at Parklands Primary, where a little boy a year prior had put his hand up in the middle of my talk, because I've been talking about steam skills and steam trains and rockets. He put his hand up and said, I said, "What do you want? What's the problem? You got a question? Do you want to go to the toilet?" He said, "No." you haven't told them about steamboats. I said, what steamboat are you talking about? Well, Titanic, built with Sheffield steel. You haven't told, and this kid is an expert on the Titanic. And bless him, that lad, I called him the Parkins Rocket Kid. I mean, I know his parents won't mind me saying this. You know, he didn't have an awful lot to look forward to for Christmas. Very, very socially challenged community there. And so I gave him this Lego train set that his dad and his mum took home, and he opened on Christmas Day. And he burst into tears. And I'll tell you something as well, when I gave him that present in Chris Dyson's office and his mum sat there, I burst into tears as well, because it's just, you know, just how all this comes together and the power of what we can do when we connect with people. So that's where my 12 days of creative Christmas came from. So as you say, yeah, we did one this year, we did one in lockdown, where with a camper van, with a studio in the back of the camper van. And then this year we went in and we live streamed the Jingle Bells Rock Christmas concert. And basically on the first day of the 12 days, I went to Parkins, we did cardboard modelling, making things out of cardboard, and then went to schools around. Because I've got the live streaming studio in the back of a camper van, you'd call it an RV. In England, they'd probably call them motorhomes, but I like to be modest. I put it in the back of a camper van, and we did live streaming of carol services in Teesside, up in the northeast of England, a nativity, carols in Herefordshire. My father was taken ill, so I had to redivert my tour and go and see him, and then went into a local church where fantastic vicar, she had a pixie Christmas jumper on and gave me a big hug at the end of it, which is lovely. And then I went to a small village school in the Welsh Valleys, where literally the whole school's got like 40 kids, and we live streamed carols from them as well with an Elon Musk satellite dish to get our internet connection because it was so remote. So yeah, gosh, I told you, I think we're about 3.5 hours into this 4-hour podcast now.
What was the process? Let's focus on Leeds. What was the process in putting together the concert?
Well, the concept was a fantastic thing, really. I mean, when I first went up there at the start of the 12 days, I didn't know they were going to be doing this, and Chris didn't, because it was actually a bit of a surprise, I think, for him as a leaving thing, because Chris Dyson was moving on at Christmas. And basically, one of the class teachers, Luke Goodwin, who's also a musician. He's got his own rock band called Titania that does all sorts of gigs in clubs and bars and festivals across the country. He is a musician, so he basically worked with the kids and some other teachers to write a rock musical based on a few carols and songs with some narrative and a bit of a semi-nativity thing and a Father Christmas thing as well. But he managed to make that into a curriculum project for them. So over the 2 months leading up to this event, the kids researched it, they wrote it, they did the graphics, they did the music, they learned to play the ukulele or the keyboards or the tambourine. He got his friends from the band in, a drummer and a guitarist. And I tell you what, it was off the scale. It was really, really, really good. So the process was nothing to do with me. They just told me they would be doing it. Could I come up and film it? And I said, of course I can. So I diverted back up there. And what was lovely, particularly at that and other events, is that I've got this green screen. Well, I've got this TV studio in the back of my camper van with a vision mixer, and I've spent a little bit of money last year on some wireless cameras. So the kids, I actually give the cameras to the kids now, so they're filming. So if anybody moans about the camera work, I don't take any complaints, because you can blame the kids. And half of them haven't even touched a video camera an hour before we go live. I show another child how to press the buttons to do the mixing, and I just stand around running around, you know, taking background footage basically and cutaway stuff. So they're actually doing it, you know, and they're getting an experience like no other. And we live stream it into their community on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, across the country if safeguarding allows. And then parents who can't, so we did the nativity service we did in Teesside was in a beautiful church. And it was the first public school event they'd had for 3 years because of lockdown. And obviously they couldn't get everybody in because every family wanted to send the grands and grannies and aunties and uncles and all these people. So basically they limited each family to 3 or 4 people, but we live streamed it so they could all sit and watch it on YouTube at home and pop comments in, which you could then pop up on the screen. And that was on a big screen behind the kids. So there was a sense of connection. I think the worst live stream events are literally just TV shows of something happening live. What you've got to do is you've got to tap into that interactivity. You've got to build a community and engagement. You've got to allow your audience to engage. like with Zoom conferences, somebody's chatting away, you're typing messages, you're inspired by things, you pop in a link, you chat to somebody else. That's the way it works. It's not rude. That's the way the world works now. And I think anybody who's stuck in a one-way live streaming environment, whether it's musicals, the sort of stuff you guys are doing, or plays, really is going to miss the trick, because people expect to be involved. They expect to be able to engage. They expect to have their views known. And you have to take them, good and bad, So we learned a lot doing that, and I can't pretend what we're doing is perfect, but because it's amateurish, we get away with, I wouldn't say murder, we get away with some very low production values, let's say that.
What kind of lessons do you think you took away from it?
From that session particularly, I think the main thing for me, actually, I shouldn't say I pride myself on not being very organised, and you've had a sense of that because it's taken you a bit of time to pin me down, but the timing is now perfect because it's day one of the new year. Because I've thrown the kids in the deep end, there's a camera, that's how it works, blah, blah, blah. What I really should do is give them a bit more structured training, even if it's a video, even if it's a few notes, how to frame a shot, how to compose it, not to be too jerky, to zoom in, to zoom out. The only thing I haven't got any comms with them. So I haven't got a headset and, sort of like a walkie-talkie thing, so I can chat to them and say, hey, camera one, zoom in on the drummer, and camera two, pull out wide. That would take it to another level, but that's another sort of £1,000 probably. I just haven't got that money at the moment. So basically I tell them to keep watching me, and I'm doing this, and you put over there, and in fact I just run round and sort of point and tap them on the shoulder now sometimes. So I mean, I've got a note over here. Goodness me, this is a post-it note from last year. This will make you laugh. Look, plan more. That was 2022's resolution. I think I'll keep that up for 23 actually. So yeah, but I mean, this is a one-man show, and I don't expect to want it to be that forever. I don't want to run a big corporation. I don't want to make millions of pounds, because it's not the plan. It's a non-profit. But what I do want to do is do this project justice, and to do the talent and the people I work with justice, so that they get the best possible production, but it still retains that grassroots authenticity and the natural flavour. I mean, there are people I'm on Facebook groups with a technology platform, I use vMix, get great support from them. Some of them turn their nose up because I'm an amateur. I mean, a bunch of ex-BBC guys refuse to work with me because I use USB, because that's not a pro technology. Well, I get that, because it's not reliable. It's let me down, but I haven't got the budget to go 10 times order of magnitude on my production costs, and neither should I, because schools should be doing this in 5 or 10 years' time. They should be doing this themselves. The technology I'm using on a very powerful gaming laptop will be available in the cloud, and all I do is plug laptops into the cloud, and that'll be camera 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, click, and there'll be vision mixing from the front row on an iPad. Basically, I think we're at the early days of the gold rush, basically the gold rush of real engaging interactive creativity and live streaming and media production. I mean, as you can sense, I've been in digital media now since the late 80s, and I used to interview staff, 30 years ago, and if they'd never done any video at all, they're virtually not going to get any further in the interview. But I talked to them about why it was important that they do, and shouldn't be intimidated about it, because at the end of the day, manipulating video is just as important now as manipulating text in Word and PowerPoint. In fact, more so, because we've now got AI bots that can write stuff. It's how we present stuff visually now that is much, much more important. So I think digital media production skills are key for absolutely everybody, and people still aren't being taught it. I've got a friend, Russell Prue, who runs a fantastic project in schools. So he installs radio broadcast studios in schools, so that kids can produce a radio show for the school every week, a bit like you're doing with your podcast. But he teaches them production skills. He gives them a pack of jingles that have their school names in. And that is absolutely fantastic. And a progression of that, not at the expense of that, because that still has a lot of value. Audio is fantastic, but TV studios in schools. And that's why I'm starting to take my live streaming TV kit out to schools and showing kids how it works, and demystifying it. Because a lot of this is available for free. Every kid's got a smartphone now. They've all got a camera. 3 mates have got 3 cameras. That's a 3-camera shoot. Stick it on the web and you can live stream and just cut and mix, and boom, you've got it, So yeah, they're very exciting times.
And there's so much of this can apply to community theatre and theatres in general, that we have the technology is so accessible in a way that it hasn't been. And you were talking earlier about VHS, and I am old enough to remember VHS, and how in even my lifetime, how much the technology has changed, that it used to be and I mean, parts of it are still very expensive, but it used to be very inaccessible. You had to be with a big studio to be able to create film. And now, like you say, any kid with a phone can do it. And the importance of having those skills taught at school, at a school level, not just when you go into college or university, that having access to those skills is just so vital today.
Well, they are, and I think what we're talking about here are cross-curricular skills as well. And that for me is why the STEAM acronym is very important, because it's not really about those science, technology, engineering, and art in maths in silos. It's about cross-fertilizing those. So think back at the Jingle Bells Rock concert that Chris and Luke and the team there ran. There's writing, there's graphic, there's design, there's set building, set design. I mean, in lockdown, I built a lot of sets with cardboard. Now, the Glastonbury thing we did with computer graphics. I like to say we built that with creativity, code, and cardboard. I did an event with Chris later that year where we built a Mars base camp in the school playground in CGI, but actually made a real cardboard model of it. So the kids could see the cardboard model, and then we superimposed it on the school playground. We got them to film it as if the rocket was taking off, because it was called the Aim High Festival, Aim High at Parklands. And I built another model of that cardboard set with a starship inspired by Elon Musk's Starship. And we had a Mission to Mars 22 UK tour. And we actually got funding from Jared Isaacman, who's a very, very generous New Yorker who went to space on one of Elon Musk's rockets in September 21, I think it was. So, yeah, September 21. And we saw that. He saw what we were doing. He gave us some sponsorship that year. And we built a cardboard Mars base camp where the Starship takes off from school playgrounds. And we had funding this year. We bought our camper van. We called it Starship 22. And the players, our camper van is our Starship. So there are occasions where we go to a venue and we get a bit of video of the van rocking up, and then the Starship lands in the school playground or outside the Ironbridge Gorge Bridge in Shropshire, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. So it's just wonderful. And people send me emails and pictures of stuff they've done with their kids and time they've spent with their children over Christmas making things. And maybe in 3 years, they'll be doing little videos and animations. And I used to build little theatres when I was a kid. The little characters used to slide on the little rods from the side and stuff like that. It's great. I might need some more children. Don't tell my wife. Go on.
What would you say to theatre companies who are hesitant to stream or hesitant to embrace technology to either promote or to share their work?
Oh, goodness me. I mean, the Arts Council England are doing a lot of work in this area, and I haven't had an awful lot of a look into that. But I think if I had some tips, the number one thing, a lot of people would think the most important thing is the visual. It isn't. The most important thing is audio, because however good it looks, that novelty wears off in about 3 minutes if you can't hear it, if the audio is rubbish. So you really do need to consider, and most theatres now obviously are miking people up anyway. They've got radio mics and audience mics and a sound desk, so that shouldn't be a challenge. Don't be intimidated by it. Obviously, if you're filming a show live, then obviously you're going to need some fairly good cameras that can work in low light. I haven't got the budget for decent cameras, or do a production that's dedicated for filming. I think, as I said earlier, I think if I had, well, audio is number one. I can't get away from that. But I think as important is think hybrid and think, how can you genuinely engage audiences who are in and away from the room? And how can you foster collaborations between them as well? So there's a brilliant video conferencing platform called Hopin. Have you come across that?
Yeah.
Yeah, for events and stuff. If you've ever been to a conference that's been run on Hopin, there's a speed dating function where you click a button and you just find yourself chatting on a video call to somebody who else is there, and you get 60 seconds. And if you get on really well, you can have another 60 seconds. Well, can you imagine watching an event in a theatre and maybe watching it at home and then pressing that button and chatting with somebody on the other side of the world at home who's watched that same show, and you can tell them what it's like to be in the theatre, and they can have a chat with you and your wife or your husband or your children or your friends or the people in the row behind you, and you can say what you thought. So, yeah, lots of potential. I mean, there's a lot to be done now. I mean, I live streamed at Camp Bestival this summer. I had my camper van backstage, and a big DJ called Fatboy Slim, who you may have heard of, really big guy, he did a set. And I gave QR codes out before he went on to the audience and said, scan this if you want to live stream into our Vision Mix. And a bunch of people scanned that code, and their camera came into my vision mix. So they were the cameramen of the Fatboy Slim set in my mix. Yeah,
That's amazing.
and it was early days. It was pretty rough and ready, because the biggest problem you have at live events is that everybody's on their phone, so there's very little data. So the lesson from that is get yourself a dedicated Wi-Fi network, which we tried to do, but I didn't have the right dongle for my SpaceX Starlink satellite system. But hey, where to go? And a few people did. And it was magic to see this guy, and you can see his face because he knew he was live, because it said you are live. And can you imagine like being able to see some concerts or Glastonbury and things like that? And you don't have to monetize everything. You know, I don't believe that live streaming cannibalizes live revenues necessarily. And there are ways of getting around that. And yeah, I don't know, but because it's so rough, you're going to make people want to go and see it properly. If they can, they will. But I suspect again, brings me back to my Post-it note, really, plan more. You know, after my father was taken ill, I had to distract and I had to divert and go to Shropshire I was in Yorkshire, I had to get down to Shropshire, which is in the south of England. And I wanted to go to Wales, and I scoured Google to see what Christmas events were on, what concerts were on, and there was a local amateur dramatics, or I don't think they were amateur actually, professional dramatic organisation doing a performance of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol in a local church. And I went to this church, my goodness, I'll never forget, it was really spooky because the church was derelict, scaffolding and planks all over it. And it was wet and gloomy, and it was quite dark. And I thought, what an amazing place to do a live stream of Charles Dickens. And it was that night. And this was like 2:00 in the afternoon. So I emailed the vicar, and he forwarded it to the production guy. And I got an email back. In fact, I phoned the guy because I didn't get a reply. And he said, I've just emailed you. I'm really sorry, but we just can't entertain this at all. And I totally got it. You know, if you're doing a production, it's going live in 3 hours, and you've got a bunch of spinning heads and headless chickens running around and spinning plates, the last thing you want is a nutcase like me, even just asking where the power is, you know, and getting in the way. So I totally got that. I mean, I would have been fairly low-fi, I must admit, but it was, so I just went and slept on the top of the mountains that night. But planning is important, obviously. But don't be afraid to give things a go. I mean, the theatre world has very high expectations, very high production values. But I think there are ways of doing things where you can manage expectations. And I think a great way of doing that would be to work with people like me, who by definition come with very low production values, who are quite quirky, quite cranky. So people and you're not there for associated. Your brand isn't damaged by the nonsense I get up with. And it might just help promote what you do, you know? So, yeah, there's some tips in there, hopefully.
For me, it just making it more accessible. Like when you're live streaming that production Jingle Bell Rock from Leeds, that the community who aren't able to come in person are still able to watch their kids perform, and now they have the record of that too, and it just makes that whole world so much more accessible.
I think the big thing for me now really is, yes, I'm a one-man band, it's all very exciting, but basically, at the end of the day, I've got to scale this. I really want to scale this. Not to make £1 million, as I say, because it's a non-profit. I'm not allowed by law to make any money, but obviously I'd like to get paid. But I want to put 22, maybe 23 people like me, we call them steamsters, on the road with a little truck that we've got that contains everything you need to run a creativity day in a school, at a fete, or at a festival. I've got one outside my house now. Last year in January, I went to John O'Groats in the northernmost tip of Scotland and launched this appeal, the Our $1,000,022 appeal, to raise this £1 million to inspire 1 million kids. A quid is slang for pound. Very bad English. Raise 1 million quids to inspire 1 million kids, powered by their creativity, powered by community. My mother was taken very ill in March, actually, unfortunately. So we went to her. And she was given a 3-month prognosis with cancer. She was riddled with cancer, bless her, and she just put up with this. And she was 83. So we got her home from hospital on the Saturday. And that night, the district nurse came in to see her, who'd be looking after her, and said, "I know you, Mrs. Corston. I've got a photo of you on the fridge in my kitchen with my 2 daughters, because you taught them painting on a summer arts and crafts play scheme that you ran with your husband in Ludlow in Shropshire 30 years ago." And the next day she brought that clipping in for me, and there it is. There's a picture of my mum with her daughters that's been on her fridge for 30 years. And then on the Sunday, a carer came in, a lady called Siobhan, who's minimum wage, low pay carer, and she said, "Mrs. Corston, you taught me sewing on that play scheme." And I realised that my mother's not an artist. My dad's worked for the BBC as an engineer for years, hated his job and became a counsellor and ran youth clubs and started local play schemes with my mum. And it made me realise that they were just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And how what I was doing with Steamco inadvertently was part of their legacy, you know. And I wrote to a few people and told them what had happened. And somebody gave me a match funding pledge of $50,000, actually, which they then upped to £50,000 to keep it simple, which I was very grateful for. And with that, we bought that camper van and paid to keep things going for a year. I went to 6 festivals. I worked with many, many schools for free. Some could pay us. But I didn't raise that £1 million. And on the Monday, I went into a local school near to Mum, actually, and launched the appeal in Shropshire, #Shropshire22. And we were on Radio Shropshire, and I played Mum the videos, and we looked at the photos, and she was very frail at this time. And she passed away the next day.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So that letter I sent out, we got the funding. Yeah, it was that you can draw such inspiration from these things, you know, and realise that, as I say, we are ordinary people, but we can do extraordinary things, as you are, connecting people globally, taking my message to people. And I'm determined that this year somebody's going to say, "Do you know what, Nick? I love what you did. I'll match fund $50,000 or pounds. I'll give you $500,000 if you can raise the other $500,000. I don't know." I just need to get 3 people on the road, because the thing is, you see, I mean, good job. There's only one Nick Corston, fortunately. I'm not saying I'm brilliant at everything, but there's only one me. I'm a fairly rare blend of people. I'm that Blue Peter child. I'm that cardboard modeler. I'm that passionate tech head, I suppose. I'm a leader. I'm a doer. But I need to prove that this can scale, that I can teach other people to do this. I can teach people to go and do the talk that I do, to lead the assemblies, to facilitate communities, to launch a dynamite rocket at the end of the day, to get the insurance covered for that. Because if we can do that for 3 schools, in 3 schools, 3 areas, I want to do it in Cornwall, I want to do it in Yorkshire, where Chris is based, and I want to do it in Shropshire, where my mother was based. If we can do that, and in 3 or 6 months show that this can scale, we can get another 20 on the road in the UK. Maybe we can get somebody in the US. I've got a few friends in the US who'd love to do this with me. Across the world, Australia, whatever, you know, it's not rocket science. My dad, talk about rocket science. My dad found a book in a charity bookshop he volunteers in 6 years ago called Rocket Boys, about how 4 boys growing up in West Virginia in the 60s didn't want to be coal miners in this dead-end coal mining town. They looked to the sky, they saw the Sputnik satellite, they learned to make rockets and ended up working for NASA. And Homer Hickam, who wrote that book, it's a Universal Studios movie called called October Sky. The book is called Rocket Boys. I think Disney did a musical of it, or doing a musical or a theatre musical of it. But that story had changed my life. Homer's generosity, I connected with him on Twitter. He gave me permission to use that story. He's been generous as a patron to a kids' club, online club we want to start maybe this year. But stories like that, time that my dad spent with me, time that my dad bothered to read that book to give to me, he gave me my art. My art is now connecting, I guess, because art, I've often got an I Love Art t-shirt on, but you caught me with a surfing t-shirt today, but I've usually got, here we go, there's an I Love Art t-shirt. If anybody wants one of those, do you want to sign up for our Patreon? I'll send you an I Love Art t-shirt. But Seth Godin gave me a lovely phrase. He said, art is what we call it when what we do connects us to somebody else. So I go into schools to help them find their art, these kids, to help them aim high with their art. Their art could be painting, photography, cooking, coding, cardboard, dancing, design, DJing, football, fashion, robots or rockets, you know. We've got to help kids, as Professor Guy Claxton said to me, we've got to help the young people in our care as parents or as community. We've got to help them find something they're passionate about, and then help them follow that dream. That's our role as society. That's role as educators, as parents, as what I call creative carers. People who care about children, who care about creativity, and who care about what Sir Ken Robinson called all our futures. Here endeth the lesson. Thank you for listening, Louisa. I hope that's been all right.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. What a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for your time today, Nick. I had such a fun time chatting with Nick. His passion for ensuring all school children receive access to the arts and creativity is inspiring. Here's a little bonus content we recorded for you.
We're recording this at the start of 23, but had a really exciting end of 2022, not least. I don't know if you know a chap called Michael Rosen. He's a fantastic children's author, a poet. He's a professor at Goldsmiths University for teaching and for literacy and English. But he has a fantastic way with words. That's what he does. But he wrote a beautiful paper called "What Have the Arts Ever Done for Us?" And he gave that as a lecture in the British Houses of Parliament for Melissa Benn and her family as part of an annual thing they do. But in that document, he talks about the importance of creativity, the importance of art, the importance of literacy and literature to children, and how if we're not careful, we're still teaching that love of reading, that love of literature, that love of theatre out of kids by making the way we teach kids so unpleasant and unbearable, phonics and some of these schemes. And I featured that paper actually because I met a young lad at the end of last year working with the Royal Opera House on an Arts Council project, a little lad called Teo, who came up to me at the end of the day and he said, "Can I tell you what I want to be when I grow up?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "I want to be a dancer." And that little lad, he then told me about how he wants to stay on the right road, what he calls the road awesome. Because I don't want to go on the road not awesome. And I made a film of this, and I've just found out that it's just been nominated for the UK Charity Film Awards, inspired in no small way by Sir Ken Robinson, his work, because he talks in the TED Talk about Gillian Lynn, who wanted to be a dancer, and she was diagnosed as being sick. There's nothing wrong with her. She was just a dancer, as the doctor told her mother. Michael Rosen publishing that paper, really succinctly spelling out in a document where Ken Robinson did the TED Talk. I believe Michael Rosen has written the white paper for the next generation, for this next decade. And as we go forward, I really want to launch a creativity revolution across the UK. I want to launch it in Shropshire, the birthplace of the world's first industrial revolution, inspired by Sir Ken Robinson, inspired by the words of Michael Rosen, but not least that young lad Teo. So look out for that. Teo's Road Awesome is the name of that film. And it's a joy to make it. It is available. It's on our YouTube channel, but it's also on the Charity Film Awards website. So go and watch it there and click the vote button. It doesn't take a second. They don't grab your email addresses or anything. It's run by the Smiley organisation. You know, the little smiley badge. It's part of their social outreach work. So yeah, do vote for that.
Make sure to check out the show notes for links to STEAMco and the videos that Nick talked about today. The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by your host, Luisa Lyons. FilmedLiveMusicals.com is where musicals come home. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Shout out and all the thank yous to our wonderful patrons, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Elliot Charles, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Hannah Graneman, Luke Hasselman, James T. Lane, Heather Madrone, Alison Matthews, David Negrin, Gerald Piper, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, Joe Tillotson, and Beck Twist. Patrons generously provide financial support to preserve the history of film stage musicals and contribute to the curation of one easy place to find them all. If you would like to support the site, receive early access to this very podcast and early access to site content, become a Filmed Live Musicals patron for as little as $3 a month. Visit filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. If you like what you hear, please leave a review on Apple Music. It really helps get the word out about the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.